Hello and thanks for coming to check this out. Hey, if you're watching from South Korea, I lived in South Korea for around 15 years, so 안녕하세요. 코리아 사랑해, 너무너무 사랑해. 한국말 할 수 있어, 그렇지만 충분하지 않다. Right, so here is the most recent After Effects reproduction using Apple's Motion 5. You can see the source animation here is from RVG Studios, and there's a link in the description if you want to go and check out that graphic. It's at their product page at the Envato Market. I chose this one to do to get some practice using the long shadow effects, which is quite a key feature, I think, of the After Effects graphic, as you can see here on all the elements, and also importantly on the titles, on the tagline here as well. So using Motion 5's tools, I think just for the work I've put in so far, I think I have something that's quite close to the source graphic, maybe about 80% there. Still needs a lot of work to get it looking better, but I'm going to move on. And what I've done is I've got the project file ready for you to download, so you can grab that just in the state that it's in. And what we'll do is go through now and have a look at that project file, and we'll have a look at how each element was done step by step, especially those shadow effects. Okay, so let's get into it. So here we are in the project file that's ready for you to download. Let's start with this element here, this radial burst of lines. So you'll find that here in this group, lines burst. I'll just turn off the other elements. So you can see it is just a replicator here, and this is the source for the replicator. In the inspector we can see that the line's really small, it's tiny, and in the style panel you can see that the first point offset has been keyframed so that the line writes off. And so this burst of lines is a replicator made from this source. Let's do another one, just roughly, so I can take you through the steps. So I'll grab the line tool, and I'm just going to draw from top to bottom. So the first thing that I want to do is move the anchor point down here to the bottom. We'll see why very soon. And now I'm going to replicate that. So I just hit L on the keyboard. We want it as a circle. We want the arrangement to outline, and we want 36 points. So here's where that anchor point is important. We're going to check a line angle, and if I adjust the angle value here, they're going to flip around. Like that. So if that anchor point was default set to the middle, they'll just rotate around this point rather than flip around properly like that. So I'll just switch off the replicator, turn the source back on, and let's keyframe that first point offset. So I'll set a keyframe there, and let's just do over 15 frames. I'll bring that all the way up there. So there we have the animation, but now we want it to burst in. So we're going to do that by keyframing the radius. So I'll set the radius here to 0. You'll see that these two lines show up. We'll talk about that soon. So now I'll bring the radius back to 200. And we get the bursting animation. So about these little lines that show up, let's just go back to the reproduction replicator here, and you'll see that there's a circle mask in there. So if I turn that off and we come back to the start, you'll see the lines are there. And my solution to get rid of that was just to do that circle mask to erase them out in that very first frame. So I did it by animating the radius rather than animating the scale of the replicator itself. If we were to animate the scale of the replicator, we won't get those lines showing up, but the lines themselves will scale in. So they'll start really, really small and then reach their size. So by doing the radius, we ensure we've got a consistent size of the lines all the way through the animation. So that's the first element done. Let's move on and have a look at the next. So the next element is this circle with the outline that will reduce as the next shape comes in over the top. So that circle is in this group here. So the circle itself doesn't have an outline, it's just a circle with a fill. It's keyframed to scale from 1% to 100%, and the outline animation is done using an image mask. So there's an image mask here. The image mask source is just a duplicate of the circle. Let's turn it on. So the image mask source comes in 2 frames later, and it scales to 101%. So it will completely mask out the white lines, and that gives us the smooth animation with the outline reducing there. So from there we have these elements. So the orange base shape is in here, logo base, here it is. So it's just an orange circle that's scaling in, and that comes in on the 8th frame. And then the next element is in here, the logo itself. So there's 2 items in here. We've got, this is the one that you can see. It's the Apple Motion logo. I've just downloaded it from the internet. It's there to download with the link. So it's just this one here, but I have a fill filter on there to make it white. This one is there to set the shadow, which we'll come back to later. So those are the main elements there, and now we come to the tagline and this flourish of lines here. So let's have a quick look at the tagline first. So in this group here, tagline, you'll see here's the text, and that is just a couple of simple steps there. The text itself is keyframed to come down on the y-axis, and the opacity is keyframed as well. The font is Raleway, and there's a link in the description to grab a free copy of that. Okay, so let's have a look at this flourish of lines here. So you'll find that in this group, lines down. So this is another replicator. There's a soft focus filter on there and fade in, fade out behavior. The soft focus filter is just to try and match the look and feel of the source graphic. So let's have a look at how this replicator was done. Just like we did before, we'll just do a rough version. So I'll grab the line tool, and I'm going to draw just from top to bottom this time. So I have my line, and I want to shift the anchor point up here. Right, so now we're going to animate the first and last offset. So let's do it from, let's just do it from here, 105. Okay, so I'm going to set a keyframe on last point offset and have that at 0. Then let's come forward 10 frames. Set that last point offset to 100% so it writes on, and then we're going to set a keyframe here on the first point offset, and 10 frames later we'll have that hit 100%. So now the line's going to, just roughly, the line will write on and draw itself off. You could do that with the write on behavior as well. So for the replicator, right, let's replicate that. We want to have that set to a line. We want 3 points. Then we're going to make sure the origin is set to center. So that means this next step will work well. We're going to adjust this one here, scale end, and let's reduce that down. So with it set to center, it's going to affect this side and this side. If I set that to start point, you'll see the difference there. So we'll have that set to center. I think you'll note with motion there's a bit of an issue where replicators, well, I've found just with these, they tend to jump in and out if the playhead is not moving, or if the playhead is moving. So the animation's working there, but what we want now is for them to come down. So you'll see in the group that I've done that by adding a sequence replicator. We could just do it by shifting the whole replicator down on the y-axis, but let's add the sequence replicator. So I'll come back to the start of it here. We'll go to replicator, sequence replicator. I'm going to add position, and then it's set to, so the animation is going to move to the point that we set. So coming forward, to the end of the animation there, let's shift it down on the Y. So there you go, that's roughly how we get this animation here. Yeah, there is an issue with motion that I've noted with replicators kind of dropping in and out like that when the playhead moves. unit size object. Okay, last thing we want to do is set the the unit size to all so that they move at the same time, like that. Okay, so that's just roughly how we get this little animation going there. So that rounds out the main elements of the animation. So now let's have a look at the shadows that I was talking about. For the shadow effects, I've used a few different things that I've learned to do with motion. So we're going to look at a Gaussian blur with mask, replicators, and also the extrude filter. So I'm going to cover these a bit quickly, but there's a link in the description to go and check out Simon Ubsdell's Replicator Shadows tutorial. So there you'll learn how to use the method that I'm going to look at quickly here, just in more detail. It's something that I've done a lot with Adobe Illustrator, but Simon Ubsdell's tutorial taught me how to do the same thing pretty much using replicators. And there's a link in the description to check out a guide that I put up a while ago to get similar effects using the extrude filter. Right, so the shadows are a big part of the animation, just comparing to the source graphic. It's the reason that I chose to do that one, to try and reproduce, to get some shadow practice. Right, let's have a look at the tagline shadows first. So in this I've got two different versions for you to have a look at. So let's get rid of this one for now. Let's look at this one. So this is using that replicator method that you can learn from Simon Ubsdell. I'll do one for you very quickly. If we get some text in here. So I have the text. I'm going to replicate the text. In the inspector, I'm going to set that to a line, and I'm going to drop the replicator under that original text and to turn that text back on. So in the replicator settings here, we're going to come down here to color mode and set that to over pattern, open up this gradient editor here and get rid of this stopper. And then I'm going to set this color to something dark. Okay, so I'm going to crank up the points, and with the replicator controls I'm just going to drag the points down so we have this extruded shadow effect happening, and I'm just going to realign it to the source text there to bring everything in. So that's one way to get the shadow effects going, and yeah, go and check out Simon Ubsdell's tutorial to get a much deeper explanation of it. Simon will explain to you why it works the way it does. And then I have come into properties here. What have we got? We've got a soft focus filter added to it. There's also defocus that I played around with, but I've just come into properties and dropped that opacity right down. So that's one way to do it. The other way is to, let's just turn this off. Another way we can do it, let's grab that same source text there. I'm going to come to filters, stylize, and extrude. So now I have this extrusion working, and I can drag it down, and with these controls here we can turn it into a shadow. And there's also another feature here, gradient, that you could use as well. So there's a link in the description that goes into this method in a lot more detail. There's a link to the guide that I put up a while ago that goes into more detail about that. But then again, with this extrude filter, if we come to properties and drop the opacity on that, then we can get a long shadow effect working there. So for the tagline long shadows, if you can see, I've used both. So I've left them both in there for you to have a look at. And let's have a look at the other items now. The logo, right, so let's have a look at the logo base. So this is the logo base, this orange element here, and if we come back at the very beginning, you see there's the long shadow coming out here, and then at the end of the animation there is the long shadow part there. So I've used two different methods to get that working. So in the beginning of the animation, in this group here, base, long shadow, there's two different shadow effects working here. The first one is another replicator. So I've just replicated the circle, and I've used the same method just with the circle shape to drag it out. Then for the next stage, if you notice, you'll see the next shadow fade in here. So this side shadow is keyframed with opacity to come in, and that's this one here. So I've called this long base shadow. This is this shape here. If I turn off this base shape, you'll see this shape sits underneath it in this group, and there is just a Gaussian blur filter applied, and I'll turn off the mask so you can see that the Gaussian blur blurs it out on both sides, but I just applied a mask to snip it off from the other side. So with those two different steps combined, we get the long shadow effect for that base shape coming in. And this, in the properties, you can see the opacity for this base shape is keyframe to come in, so it just appears in the last few frames there. The circle itself, I think I just applied the regular drop shadow, which is what you can see here. And for the logo itself, so we looked at it before, I think. We've got the top logo, which is set with the fill filter just to turn everything white, and then we have this one that's sitting underneath. So the shadow effects are applied to this one, and I've used the extrude filter on that to get the shadow working there. So that's how I managed to try and reproduce the long shadow effects of the After Effects graphic. And yeah, so there's links in the description to go and get a lot more information about the extrude filter method and the long shadow method, if you want to go and check those out. So there it is. That's the end of it for this reproduction. A bit of walkthrough with the project file and a little bit of tutorial in there for beginners. I hope that this is useful for you with your future projects, and thanks for watching.